Hello, my name is Lisi Mainwaha, and today I'll be hosting the drone seminar, a drone webinar with you today. So I've just turned on my camera so you can get to know the face behind the name. So I've turned it on a little bit now, and just hi to everyone who's attending. I'm very thankful that you're here, and I hope it'll be an informative session for you. I'll turn my camera off now, and then we'll begin. With this webinar, you can actually ask questions. So if you have a question, there should be an icon, a hand that you can click on, and that will notify me if you have questions, or there's a chat feature, and then that's how we'll know if you have any question you'd like to chat. So let's begin. So just a little bit about me. My name, as I said before, is Lisi Mainwaha. I am an associate at Michalsons Attorneys, and we're a team of practical IT and privacy lawyers who believe that we practice law differently. Thanks again for attending this webinar. I hope that you gain some knowledge on drone laws in South Africa and the regulations, and just a little bit more insight on this specific area. One of our key mottos at Michalsons is that if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough, because we believe in simple law. So I hope with this webinar, I'm able to explain the specific aspects of the regulations to you in a way that you can understand. So let's begin. So in South Africa, the Civil Aviation Authority created the drone regulations. That's the colloquial term for it, but the regulations on the remotely piloted aircraft systems, or as we know them, RPASs or RPAs, or whatever you'd like to call them. But usually we will just call them drones, and I'll refer to them as drones in this webinar. So SA is a pioneer in the drone regulations because a lot of countries didn't have and were grappling with how to deal with the regulations or how to regulate the use of drones in their airspace. And South Africa was, I think, one of the very first countries to have some kind of law related to this. So the regulations came into effect from the 1st of July 2015. So they've been around for at least 2 years, quite a bit now. So South Africa we've been dealing with having regulations and regulating our skies. And to find the regulations, you'll find them in the Civil Aviation regulations under Part 101. That's the specific section, part of the regulations that deals with the drone regulations. And the key aspect of the regulations, and one thing that you'll notice is that it's divided between commercial operations versus private operations. And in terms of the broad definition of commercial operations, this includes what we know as commercial operations, also corporate operations, nonprofit as well. And private operations are their own separate aspect. And the differentiation between commercial operations, which we'll get into later, and corporate operations is essentially, with commercial operations, your core business is that drone business. You're getting money from flying your drone for whatever reason, maybe as a photographer using your drone or things like that. But with corporate operations, the difference is that this is not the focus of your business. It's a part of your business where you hire a professional person to use a drone to enhance that part of your business. So it's not the focus of your business. That's the slight differentiation between corporate and commercial operations. So for example, if the city of Cape Town or any government organization uses drones, for example, for security or monitoring of traffic, that's not the core of their operations as government, but because they're using the drone as part of their what they do, then that would be commercial. So let's go into the actual drone. The focus of this webinar will be mostly on commercial operations. We will touch on private operators as well, but the focus is really on commercial operations and what that actually means. So to operate your drone commercially in South Africa, you would need several different kinds of licenses. And this table is just to show the kind of licenses and different things that you're required to be approved to use your drone in South Africa and what those specific things are. So the first thing, and you'll notice that there's some commonalities between commercial, corporate, and nonprofits, but then there's one distinct difference between, for example, a commercial operator and a corporate or nonprofit operator. So the first thing you'd be required is what we call an air services license. So you would get that from the Department of Transport. That's where you would apply to get an air services license. The next thing you would need is a RPAS operator certificate. So this is the operator certificate. You would also need a letter of approval from the Civil Aviation Authority. And if you're a pilot, you would need a remote pilot license. Lastly, you would need a certificate of registration. So this is when you actually register your drone or your several different drones with the Civil Aviation Authority. And if we go into the actual classification of drones, you'll notice that there are different classes and different things that you require, and that's how they classify drones, because usually drones would only be classified by their weights. Now they use four key factors such as the line of sight, the energy, the height, and the mass of the drone to determine what class and what classification it would be. So in terms of the regulations, private operators can only operate in ARVLOS, so that's can only operate in ARVLOS and with a Class 1A or Class 1B type of drone. So that's where they're limited to. Other operators, for example, commercial operators, can go beyond that, but the ones that are restricted or reserved or other classes, they would require the approval from the director of the Civil Aviation Authority. Now, if we go back to this table, there are several different things that you require. As I mentioned before, you need the air services license from the Department of Transport, and you would need the operator certificate. And in terms of operator certificate, what it actually is a document that details the types of operations that you would do, so basically for a commercial operator, a corporate operator, or a nonprofit operator. And you would apply for this operator certificate to the Civil Aviation Authority, and you'll make your application out to the director. And also in terms of renewing for example, if you already have an operator certificate, to renew it, you would apply to the director of the Civil Aviation Authority. An operator certificate is valid for 12 months from the date that it was issued, and if you would like to renew your operator certificate, you would need to do that at least 60 days before it expires. So you definitely have to keep track of the dates and things like that, so that when you're running your drone business, that your operator certificate is still valid and things like that. So definitely with these different licenses, they have different validity dates. So it would be important to make sure that you know when your operator certificate or whichever other license was issued, and make sure that they're still valid as you're still operating. So if you're a holder of an operator certificate, you have certain duties. Like you need to make sure that all the activities that you conduct are actually granted in terms of the certificate, and make sure that you comply with anything else. So for example, the director of the Civil Aviation Authority can issue different directives or amend the regulations. You need to make sure that whatever operations that you do are still in line with that. So it's definitely important for you to check the technical guidance material circulars to make sure that you're up to date with what's going on. In your operator certificate, as a holder of an operator certificate, another thing that you would need is an operations manual. So this is something that you have to develop, and you need to get the approval from the director of the Civil Aviation Authority. And what this manual essentially says in details is this different types of activities that you'll be doing and the scope of those activities or operations, as well as if, for example, you have multiple drones, which you will be operating those and the safety consideration that you'll take. So you need to make sure that your operator's manual has included all of this information and any other legal obligations that you may have. And another thing someone with a operator's certificate needs is to make sure that they establish particular safety management systems in line with the size of the organization or your business, your drone business, as well as taking out insurance. So this is for essentially anyone who has an operator certificate and anyone has a drone. It's advisable to take out insurance so that you're properly protected should anything occur. So the next thing that you would need to commercially fly in South Africa is a letter of approval, which you would also receive from the Civil Aviation Authority. And you would also need your pilot's license if you're a pilot, or the pilot that you hire would also need to make sure that they have a pilot's license. In terms of your pilot's license, that is valid for 24 months, and you need to make sure, and for reevaluation, to make sure that you are renewing your license, you need to make sure that 90 days before your current license expires that you apply for the reevaluation. And lastly, as I mentioned, you need a certificate of registration that shows that your drone has been registered with the Civil Aviation Authority. It's important to note that the rules related to drones and drone operations don't apply to toy aircraft, to model aircraft, unmanned free balloons, or any other aircraft that you cannot manage in real time, cannot be managed on a real-time flight basis. So these things are excluded from the regulations. A very important aspect of the drone regulations, and something that's quite crucial for everyone to know and understand, is that if you're a seller of a drone, if that is the type of business that you're running, make sure that you make buyers aware that there are regulations before you make the sale. So if you're selling, for example, a DJI to someone, make sure that they are aware that regulations exist, and you can even point them into the direction of the Civil Aviation Authority's website. So let's look further into a pilot. As I mentioned before, to fly a drone in South Africa, you need a pilot's license, and it's valid for 24 months from the date that it's been issued to you. In terms of a pilot's license, there's specific requirements you need to be a pilot. You need to be 18 years or older, complete flight training, and pass the online theoretical knowledge exam from the Civil Aviation Authority, pass the skill test, and complete a medical self-assessment form, and also hold an English language proficiency level of 4 or higher. So those are all the requirements that you would need to be a pilot and to be able to lawfully fly a drone. One interesting aspect of all of the licenses and different things that you may need as a drone operator, or just in general, is that you can apply for the licenses concurrently. So for example, you can start, you do need a letter of approval first when it comes to registering your drone, but you can also apply for your pilot's license at the same time. Now, there are specific requirements related to how you fly your drone, and these apply across the board to both commercial operations and also to private operators. So these rules usually apply across the board to both. So for example, you can't fly higher than 400 feet above the ground within 10 kilometers of an aerodrome. An aerodrome can include things like an airport. So if, for example, I'm a private operator and I want to fly around in and around my house and things like that. If my house, for example, which is an interesting conundrum, if my house is, for example, within 10 kilometers of an aerodrome, according to the law, I cannot fly my drone. Even though it's within my property, I wouldn't be able to, just because of the that 10-kilometer radius and distance from an aerodrome. Another thing is that I cannot fly within restricted or prohibited airspace. You may also not fly your drone adjacent or above a prison, nuclear plant, police station, a crime scene, court of law, or national key points. There are some exceptions, however. If you are a holder of a valid holder of an ROC, your operator certificate, and if you have been given approval by you may be able to fly adjacent or above these things. But you have to first get that approval and be stated in your operator's manual that you will be doing these things. You'll be flying in restricted airspace, for example, around national key points and things like that. But first, you need the approval before you can do this. If you're a private operator, unfortunately, you cannot fly anywhere close to these things that I've mentioned. Very importantly, you cannot fly your drone within 50 meters above or close to a person, a crowd of people, your control. For example, you're filming a video and these people are actors participating in the video. You may fly within 50 meters above them. So in that sense, they're under your control. Or, for example, if you've been given their permission to fly close to them, then you may do that. So think of things like in festivals and stuff like that. Usually you wouldn't be able to fly close to the people and film them in that way. But if you've been given the permission of the festival organizer and the area where they're held, you may fly closer to them. Importantly, you cannot fly in bad weather. This is for both private and commercial operators. You need to make sure that you fly. You need to make sure that the weather that you fly in, that you maintain visual contact with your drone and the operator. I see that we have a question. And the question is, what does RPAS stand for? RPAS stands for a remotely piloted aircraft system. So that's what that acronym means. Okay. So usually in bad weather, you should not regulations. Interesting to fly beyond visual line of sight, and night flying is allowed for private operators. For commercial operators, they need to apply, for valid holders of operators certificates, they need to apply to the director to fly at night. Another thing that drones cannot do, and this part is quite specific to private operators, they cannot do these things at all. You cannot transport cargo using your drone or make any form of deliveries, tow another aircraft, or perform aerial or acrobatic displays, or fly in a formation or swarm. For commercial operators, if they've been granted an exemption by the director of the Civil Aviation Authority, they may actually do these things. So if your business requires you to maybe try and transport cargo and things like that, for example, various companies in the States of UK or other places where there are some form of regulation to deliver and drop. I know in New Zealand, there's a very important and crucial aspect is when it comes to incidents and accidents. You are required to report them to the Civil Aviation Authority. And if possible, you would also need to report the incident to the police, especially if a person is involved in it and there's been an accident where they have gotten hurt. The holder of the RC would need to report that. And if, for example, a pilot's involved and he's not the holder of the RC, you would need to inform them that an accident or an incident has occurred using their drone. So when there's any injury to a person, damage to property, or destruction of the actual drone beyond repair, then you would need to report this incident. So my advice is always to, when we get these kinds of inquiries, is to definitely report it to the Civil Aviation Authority, because they have a specific process when it comes to reporting accidents. And I'd also report it to the police, especially if it deals with private people and their property, and there's maybe damage to their property that has occurred. So now, before we get to processes, just a little bit more on the different types of how the regulations would apply in certain cases. There are other things that are required of you as an operator, either as a commercial operator. So these things would be, for example, that you're required, there are certain C2 operational requirements that you would need. And those things will be found in the technical standards. So CATS 101, you'd find those things. And you need to make sure that when you're flying, that you take precautions and safety considerations into account. You need to make sure that your drone is fit to fly and it's in the correct condition to fly. And of course, you, as a pilot, like I said, you have to make sure that you do hold a valid license. And you need to make sure that if you're flying various different types of drones, that they are only controlled by one person at a time, and that you do not endanger, most importantly, especially because safety is something they emphasize, especially with the Civil Aviation Authority, they emphasize safety a lot. You need to make sure that you don't endanger the safety of a person or property or any other aircraft. So that's quite important, especially as more and more people are receiving drones as gifts, or they're using them, or more drone businesses are coming into play. You need to make sure that you don't endanger a person or property. And you'd also require a first aid kit if you are a commercial operator, as well as a handheld fire extinguisher. And an important thing when it comes to your pre-flight preparations is that you make sure that you operate within the operations that you've specified in your manual, and that your operations are safe. Safety is definitely very important and the most important. Regulations also state that you can't fly near a public road, but it's, in addition to this, you can't take off or land on a public road, and you need to make sure that wherever you do take off or land is a safe place and safe area and suitable for the type of aircraft that you do have. And lastly, one aspect that's very, very important is that you need to give right of way or give way to manned aircrafts. Because as drones are a new and emergent type of technology, and they have been around for years, but they have developed and things like that, you can get very close to manned aircraft. For example, yesterday there was a video that I saw of a drone flying and shot a beautiful shot of an airplane. But the scary part of it is that they were very, very close to the airplane to shoot that shot. And have been various incidents around the world with drones affecting airplanes, and either the pilot has to turn the plane around, or the planes have been hit by drones. So it's very important that you make sure that you give way to manned aircraft, and so don't exceed the height and safety regulations that that have been put in place. An important aspect as well in terms of who you hire and who participates in your drone operations is to make sure that the holder of an operator certificate needs to make sure that whoever they recruit, that they conduct background checks on every single personnel or anyone who's handling or deploying or storing the drone. And you may also are required to conduct criminal record checks every 24 months on your employees. So it's very important. They emphasize safety in different aspects, from just operating the drone and also to the people that will be operating or handling the drone. So safety is very important. And you need to make sure that your drone is actually stored in a secure place and that nothing can interfere with it, so there's no unauthorized interference. So it's very important to keep not just yourself and not just your personnel, make sure that there's security there, but also for your actual drone. So now when we look at the process of applying, the process can be quite long, and is unfortunately can be costly because of the different aspects and different licenses you require. But it's important that you follow some key things. So the first step that the Civil Aviation Authority recommends is that you actually read the other pieces of material, such as the entire Part 101 regulations, as well as the technical standards. So that would be the SACAA 101 and also the Aeronautic Information Circulars. So it's important to read all the other additional material and become aware of its contents and things like that. And in terms of the technical standards, we have technical standards like for RPASs or drones, and the Aeronautic Information Circulars relate to three aspects, right? The personnel licensing, so that would relate to your pilots and relate to your RPL license, as well as circulars about the aviation training organization. So this would be related to training organizations that train specifically for drones. And there's also AIC related to the specific fees that you have to pay. So fees relating to them perusing your application, fees relating to the different licenses. So those pieces of information are very important and should be read and understood in line with the actual body of the regulations. And in terms of the technical guidance material, there's different technical guidance material relating to operating your drone, so the operations, for your letter of approval, for the pilot licensing, and also maintenance, because maintenance is an important aspect of commercial operations. So it's important that those technical guidance materials are read on those specific topics. So after you've familiarized yourself or you've read these different things, you would also need to determine the type of operation that you are. So for example, are you a commercial operator? are you a corporate operator, nonprofit, or private? Because that will help you determine the specific kinds of approvals that you would need. For different types of approvals, you would need in specific types of licenses. The only thing that would really differ is whether you would need to apply for a air services license from the Department of Transport or not. And you'd also look at the classification of your drone. That would be your next step to see where you want to operate or what you'd like to apply for and whether you'd need to get approval from the director. And in line with that, you'd also look at the limitations and prohibitions for the different operations. So with this, you'd see whether, yet again, you'd see whether you need to apply or get specific approval from the director, or if what you'd like to do and your operation process is allowed without extra approval. So for example, if you'd like to fly higher than 400 feet, you would, in that case, you definitely need the approvals. Then you would submit your application with the necessary supporting documents. So as you'll of this flow diagram is that it says that you would need to send a letter of intent to the Civil Aviation Authority. So those are the types of documents and supporting documents that you'd need. So you'd need that third-party liability insurance, and then prepare all the required documentation and submit it to the Civil Aviation Authority. So those type of things would be necessary for you to do. So similarly, for your letter of approval, you would first do the application and submit the necessary supporting documents. Then your application and your documentation would be reviewed. And if necessary, and if applicable, you'd also need the application, your drone to be inspected. And should everything be fine, you would get your letter of approval issued to you. So this is just a flow diagram of the different processes and the different licenses you would need and how you would go about doing that. Okay, let me see if there's anything else. Like I mentioned before, the Civil Aviation Authority's website has a specific section dealing with remotely piloted aircraft systems. And as I mentioned before, reading the different technical standards and circulars, as well as the guidance material, is definitely helpful in understanding what you need and what you need to comply with the regulations. So I definitely encourage you to visit the Civil Aviation Authority's website and see and ask them for any level of assistance for the different things that you would need. So that's about it. Does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to ask? So this is definitely time to just ask if you have questions. Okay. I see we have a question. So will we get access to the presentation? Yes, I will send a link through to everyone who has attended the webinar with a link to the presentation. So we'll definitely have access to it. The flow diagrams, I think they're actually part of one of the guidance materials, so I can, if necessary, so you would be able to have the diagram. And another question is, can you fly a drone over a beach without permission? Well, a beach is a public area. That one is quite tricky. I think that the problem with that is that on a beach, there are different people. So unless you're willing to get everyone's permission, which is unrealistic, is that I don't think it'll be possible for you to fly over a beach just because of the nature of what a beach is, and the fact that there's members of the public who wouldn't want to be filmed by your drone. Oh, a deserted beach. If it's a deserted beach, I think it would be fine unless it's within 10 kilometers of a airspace, which is unlikely. So I would say you would be able to fly over a beach. Another question is, are there any examples of people being fined or jailed for failing to comply with the drone regulations? The Civil Aviation Authority does have a specific section for fines related to non-compliance with any of their regulations. But I think there have been some instances, especially early on, when there were no regulations, of people being fined, or people being fined or being warned about not complying with the regulations. But currently, I don't think that currently hasn't been, or recently there haven't been any fines related to this. Because the problem is that with these regulations, they're quite onerous, so people do take a lot of time to comply with them. Another question, is it mandatory to attend an ATO training class before writing the exam? Yes, I think the regulations do state that you have to attend a training class and then write the exams. Are there any other questions? So the question that's been asked is where can we get access to the actual regulations? So the Civil Aviation Authority does have a link to all of the regulations on their website that is accessible. I also do have a copy of the regulations, which I can send to you if that's necessary. Another question, can we receive a copy of this webinar documentation? I'm sorry, I'm not clear on what you mean by webinar documentation. So is it possible for me to unmute you so you can ask this question out loud? Hi, Ken.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. What I mean by that is this presentation that you did today. Is it possible to get a copy of this?
Oh yes, I will be sending a link out after the presentation is done.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I think that's it unless we have any more questions. I don't believe we have any more questions unless anyone wants to just add something. Okay, I think, so as I mentioned earlier, you will all receive a link to the presentation. I'll also send a link, I think, to the flowchart and the actual regulations if you don't have a copy already. But thank you very much for attending this webinar and asking great questions. The questions were very good. Thank you very much. And for just listening to me discuss the drone law regulations. So if you need anything further regarding drone law or anything else, you can contact me at lisa@michalsons.com. And I can try and help you with anything related to that. So thanks again for attending. I hope it was informative and helpful to you. And have a nice day going forward.